Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Zevachim. We're in the Mishnah. We're starting a new Mishnah on Daf Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. More of a difficult blot today. We're going to learn one blot. It's also a little bit of a thicker Amud Beis. We'll stop at the Mishnah on the bottom of Lamed Hey Amud Beis today. And then in Yirtzeh Hashem, we have some relatively consistently sized blot, including a small one on Lamed Tes. I pine for the day that we only prepare one blot for Zvachim. I'm motivated too. I just need more time and I overslept this morning. Let's get started with this new Mishnah. The Mishnah says in the middle of Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, Hashochet es hazevach lechol davar she'ein darko lechol ulahaktir davar she'ein darko lahaktir. You are the shochet, you have a korban, and you have a machshava asura, you have a machshava espigol about a part of the animal that is not eaten. So let's say you have a machshava espigol about eating the hoof, chutz lizmano. So the halacha is that that's not pigol, and your machshava is a zero, and the animal's a kosher, right? Because machshava espigol has to be about something that is normal to eat, and this is not normal to eat. Fascinatingly, and out of the scope for today's conversation, Rabbi Eliezer Posel, he says, no, you still got some problems going on here. Even if your machshavas pigul is about the hoof of the animal, which is completely inedible, or any other body part, we'll discuss some of those other body parts in a minute, and even in the Mishnah, we'll just discuss it. But Rabbi Eliezer holds that the machshavas pigul of eating the hoof, chutz lizmano, afal pi, that it's inedible, he holds that it's possible. Okay, what about lechol davar shedarko lechol? Let's say you have a machshavas chutz, machshavas pigul about something that is edible. Let's say a rib roast. Ulahaktir davar shedarko lahaktir, or to be maktir, to burn up a food that is normal to put on the put on the mizbeach, but it's pachos mikazayas. So your machshavas pigul is perfectly usher, you nailed it, but the amount of food in your machshava is pachos mikazayas. The halacha is kasher. That's not a machshavas pigul. A machshavas pigul requires not only that you have the appropriate, you have the requisite aser machshava of eating something chutz lizmano. However, it has to be that your machshava is talking about eating a shiur. If you're not going to be consuming a shiur, then you are not violating the iser pigul. You're no tzaddik. You're still like right on the cusp of violating the iser, but nevertheless, the food would be kosher. What about lechol kechatzi zayis ulahaktir kechatzi zayis kosher? There, if I had a machshava to eat a half of a zayis of regular meat, and to be maktir a half of a zayis of regular meat, eating half and burning half, that's kosher. And this is something that we saw earlier in the Gemara, and if you look on the side, you'll see that we saw this as well earlier, and that we'll see it again later and in other Masechtas, because, and it's a very important principle, she'ein achila v'haktara mitztarfen, that when we talk about a machshavas pigul, we're not allowed to combine the shiurim of achila for a person and achila for a mizbeach. So therefore, that would be kosher. Next part of the Mishnah, and we're 2/3 of the way down on Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. Let's say that I had a machshavas pigul and I nailed it. I want to eat this chutz lizmano, and I wanted to eat a kizayis, but it's part of the body that we don't normally eat. It's the or. Typically speaking, the skin of, the hide of an animal is inedible. We use hide for Sifrei Torah, and we use them for other purposes, for tefillin. They're not, it's more than chewable. It's inedible. So I have kavana to consume something, but it's not a regular food. And here's the rest of the list. Umin harotev, which sounds just delicious, the juices of the animal. Umin hakipa. The kipa is a reference to the parts of the animal that kind of sink to the bottom when you're cooking it. Okay, I don't know which part specifically it's talking about. Umin ha'alal. The alal is like some of the cartilage that's found in the throat of the cow, which is inedible. Cartilage in smaller animals, as we'll soon see, is edible, but this kind of cartilage is not. Umin ha'atzamos, or to eat bone, which is not a simple task. Umin hagidin, to eat some of the sinews. Umin hakarnaim, the horns. Umin hatzlafim, or to eat the hooves. Chutz lezmano v'chutz lemekomo, kosher. In all of these cases, it's gonna be kosher. These things are not edible. They're not edible at all. And if you would eat one of these pieces of food, and you ate them, if in fact you tried to do pigul and failed, if you ate them, your pigul failed. It's not pigul, nor would it be nosar if you were before the zman, and if you're tameh, you also wouldn't have an isser. This is not no longer regular because you were not able to make it into pigul with your machshava.
When it says venosa, it means that you actually ate it.
Yeah, this whole, if you look at Rashi, a third of the way down, Dibra Maschil ve'ein chayav and alei mishum pigul, Rashi says, Im hoya hazevach pigul, shechishev al besaro o al emurav chutz lezmano, v'nis pagel, ha'ochel me'elu pater. That's even, oh, sorry, even if it became pigul. Ah, sorry, it's a correction. Thank you. I actually marked off in my Gemara to read that Rashi. That if it were to have become pigul and you ate the tzlafim, you ate an inedible part of the body, so then the halacha is that it would have been the achila is not aser, and if it would have been nosar and you ate the tzlafim, it also would not be aser, and if the meat was tameh, you also would not be chayav. Thank you for calling that out. Hashochet is hamukdashin. I would have thought Balabatish that Mukdashin was talking about something that was sanctified. Rashi tells us that that's not what's happening. Take a look at Rashi, Dibra Hamaschel Es HaMukdashin. This phrase apparently means the following. Kol hecha denakit hai lishna mayri b'nekevos. We're talking about female animals. So, Hashochet Es HaMukdashin, and you did so, le'echol shlil. There was a fetus inside the animal that maybe that was a delicacy. You know, all the Ben Pakuas that we discussed as Ben Pakua Burgers, the new restaurant that somebody wants to open. No more shechita would ever be required. If you mate two Ben Pakuas, you never need shechita ever again. So anyways, if a person wanted to eat the shlil, so you shech the mother and consume the fetus, o shilya, or you wanted to eat the placenta, also known in our parlance as the afterbirth, and you wanted to eat it bachutz, the halacha is lo pigel. The reason why there's no pigul here is because it's not considered to be part of, it's not really considered to be a part of the zevach. They're attached to the body, but only in a super temporary way. Hamolek es hatorin, one who does malika on a bird, and you killed the bird, lechol beitzehen bachutz, with kavana to eat its eggs outside, the halacha is lo pigel, because eggs as well, that's kol shekain. If the placenta is not considered to be a part of the body, then certainly an egg in a bird is not considered to be part of a body. Chalav mukdashin, ubeitze torin, the milk of female animals, and the eggs of birds, ein chayav alei mishum pigul v'nosar v'tameh. If in fact they were to have become pigul or nosar or tameh, you would not be chayav on drinking the milk or eating the eggs because, again, they are not connected to the body. We're now going to get into a very nuanced and complex conversation about if I am mefagel one part of a korban, does it necessarily cause for pigul in other parts of the korban? Says the Gemara, 7-8 lines from the bottom of Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. The Gemara opens, Amar Rabbi Elazar, pigel bezevach. If I am mefagel the animal, this is talking about a female animal, and I'm mefagel the whole animal, so then nispagel hashlil. Even though the shlil is not necessarily connected to the animal, but nevertheless, if I'm mefagel the zevach, it ruins the shlil. And there's some temporary connection, but it's enough to ruin the shlil. But the opposite is not true. Says the Gemara, bishlil, if I was mefagel on the shlil, so then lo nispagel hazevach. So then the halacha is that if I had kavana for the shlil, it's only one direction. If I'm mefagel the zevach, it ruins the shlil. But if I'm mefagel the shlil, it doesn't ruin the zevach. One directional. And we're going to spend most of the Amud Beis analyzing this to see how accurate it is. Pigel be'olal. Let's say that the person was mefagel on the olal, which is that cartilage in the throat, the cricoid cartilage. So then, nispalga mora, that will then cause pigul in the crop, which is part of the animal's digestive tract. But b'mora lo nispagel olal, same principle, one directional. And lastly, and this one we're going to be speaking about in more depth, is pigel be'emurin. If one were to be mefagel with the emurin, with the extra body parts, nispalgu parim, the rest of the par will become problematic. We'll discuss this in more depth in a moment. But beparim, if you're mispagel on the par, lo nispaglu emurim, that will not ruin the emurim. Now we need to give some background here. This is talking about a case scenario of parim hanisrafim. The Chumash in Vayikra speaks about this, that there are some korbanos that when after we shech the animal, the emurim go on the mizbeach, but the rest of the par is burnt outside of the Beis Hamikdash. So you can't do pigul on things that don't go on the mizbeach. So therefore, let's read this line again. Knowing that the parim hanisrafim, that the emurim go on the mizbeach, but the meat really doesn't. It gets burned outside of the mizbeach. Therefore, if you're mefagel be'emurim, yes, that can ruin the par, that can ruin the basar that you're going to burn outside of the Beis Hamikdash. But beparim, you can't be mefagel the parim. That's not korban. That's that meat gets burned somewhere else, and therefore lo nispal goemurim, one directional. So now the Gemara is going to bring, we'll see, two proofs in a row, followed by a disproof, followed by a proof. And then we're going to conclude, like the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, that we do believe in single directional pigul. Let's just use the following terminology. Within an animal, there are two parts. Part A can become pigul without B becoming pigul, but the opposite is not true. If B becomes pigul, then A becomes pigul. So it's one directional, and therefore we have to analyze this. Lema mesayele. Maybe we actually have a makom that supports Rabbi Elazar's shita that A can make B into pigul, but B can't make A into pigul. And this is actually a machlokes tanoim elsewhere. If you look up in the Makomos here, this is later on Daf Kuf Dalet here in this Masechta. And over there's a machlokes between Reb Shimon and the Chachamim in regards to parim hanisrafim. But one thing that they agree upon is the following. V'shavin she'im chishe ba'achilas parim u'visreifasan lo asa v'lo klum. Remember what we said about parim hanisrafim, is that the par itself, not the emurim, but the rest of the basar, is going to be burnt outside of the makom hamikdash. So what do they agree upon? Whatever machlokes they have on Daf Kuf Daled, we'll get there in a month or two. But what they agree upon is that if my kavana of people is on parim that are going to be burned outside the mikdash, lo asa v'lo klum, because you can't be mefagel something that's being burnt outside of the Beis Hamikdash. It's just not shaykh. So my love, doesn't that seem to imply that hachishe be'emurim nispalgu parim? Doesn't that imply that, oh, okay, you said that they were shavin, that if I had a machshava of achila for parim chutz lizmano, that's nothing, but that implies hachishe be'emurim nispalgu parim, and that then would be a beautiful raya for the sheet of Rabbi Elazar, because what do we see? That if you had a machsheves emurim, then it would be mispalig, it would ruin the basar of the par. And therefore we have a raya like the shita of Rabbi Elazar. Says the Gemara, lo, that's not true. Turning to the top of Lamed Hamid Beis. What really is going on here is hachishe be'emurim. If one were to have had a machsheves pigul about emurim, nispalgu emurin atzman. We weren't talking about extending the pigul that you created by the emurim onto the parim. All we're saying is that you make the emurim puzzle with having that machshava, but lav dafka that we're extending it anywhere else. You see, Rabbi Eliezer's shita was more articulate. He said, if you have a machshava by the emurim, it ruins the par. If you have a machshava by the par, it doesn't ruin the emurim. But the diuk that we tried to make in this Marimakom from Daf Kuf Dalid, the diuk went too far. It was lav dafka that's what the Mishnah meant. So instead of saying that had it been that it was a murim, it would be mafagel the par. We don't know that to be true, and therefore the proper way to learn the Gemara from Daf Kuf Dalet on this top line of Lamed Hamid Beis is to say hachishe be'emurim nispal ge'emurin atzman. We can't know ein l'dayin elamash ein abros. All I know is what I see, and what I see is that you had a machshava about the emurim. If you have a machshava about the emurim, I don't know anything about the par without you telling me explicitly. So much as you want to try and use this as a raya for Rabbi Elazar, it doesn't work. Nice try. Let's shut down. And on the second line of Lamed Hamid Beis, we bring a second raya for the opinion, or a second attempted raya, I should say, for the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. Tashma, all on the same theme, talking about parim hanisrafim. Parim hanisrafim v'useirim hanisrafim. If you have a par or a sa'ir that gets burnt, mo'alin behen mishahuktashu, me'ila kicks in on these animals once they were mukdash to the Beis HaMikdash. Once the owner made it hektish, or once Bezdin made it hektish, that's when the beginnings of Me'ilah can apply. Prior to that, there's no Me'ilah, it's only a regular chulin cow. But once you are makdish the cow and it becomes either a par hanisrafim or seir hanisrafim, then Me'ilah kicks in. Nishchatu, once the animal, the par hanisrafin or the seir hanisrafin, once they're shechted, then huchshiru li pasel b'tvul yom u'v'mechusar kippurim uvelina. At that point, they become huchshiru, they become susceptible to the following things, that they could be pasel with a tvul yom. As we know, a tvul yom is like a Baal Keri who went to the mikvah, but we haven't had Herav Shemesh yet. Uvimechusar Kippurim is Zav Zava Yoledas and Mitzorah, who are missing a korban. Uvelina. Now, we've already made this equivalence in our Gemara earlier, that lina, which is letting a korban go too far, is very similar to pigul. Because the machsheves pigul chutz lizmano is, I'm going to eat it after its zman. So nosar and pigul are quite similar. So then says the Gemara, my lav linas basar. Doesn't that mean that you're talking about linas basar? Again, we're not talking about the emurim, but the basar itself. Ushma mina, and says the Gemara, perhaps the diuk from this brisa, that is from Me'ilah actually, and also again on Kuf Daled. Ushma mina migu de pasla belina pasla ba machshava. Just like lina pasels once the animal was shechted, so too, because it's so similar, we should say that there's pigul chutz lezmano that applies, and maybe that therefore is going to be a beautiful. And maybe that therefore is going to be a beautiful raya for Rabbi Eliezer. Says the Gemara, lo, who said we're talking about the basar bichlal? Lo, linas emurim. We're only talking about the emurim. We're not discussing the meat that's burned outside of Yerushalayim, so you can't bring any rayas. Says the Gemara, how can you say we're talking about emurim? Hamidikatani seifra from that Gemara in Me'ilah or later on Kuf Daled. What does it say over there? Kulan moalin behen al beis hadeshen. There's Me'ilah al beis hadeshen for where it's burning. Ad sheyutach habasar. Yutach means burned, until all the basar is burnt. So the Seifa, Michlal de Reisha, is talking about linas basar. If the Seifa was talking about basar, then the Reisha is also talking about basar. You wanted to say no proof for Rebbe Lazar, because the only proof for Rebbe Lazar is if it was talking about basar. Yeah, but the end of the same Bryce is talking about basar. So what are you going to tell me? That the Reisha is going to be talking about Emurin and the Seifa is going to talk about basar? Midi Irya, is that something that we would be willing to do? And says the Gemara, yeah, Hakida Reisha Emur Seifa Basar. Yeah, that's totally fine. We make these bifurcations all the time in the Gemara. I would say oddly so, because in general we do try to avoid it. But the Gemara's understanding over here is that, yeah, it's okay. The Reisha was talking about Emurin, and therefore not, it doesn't like this at all.
Oftentimes in the Talmud, it's like trying to stem them together. And here it's just like pull shoot. Nope, they're separate. End of story.
So I'll react to that in the following way, which is that there has to be a reason why the Gemara is allowing this to happen. And we don't see it in the Gemara.
Right.
And I didn't look into the Rishonim. But I think in general, you're right. In general, there needs to be something that compels us to break the general rule of we like things to be thematic. It's true. We don't know what that is. And I've been finding this in small ways throughout this Masechta so far. The text is not as full as other Masechtas. Like there are things that are missing. Yeah, it's like 10% more terse than other, maybe 20% more terse than other Masechtas. Because I would have loved to have seen, really? Throughout Shas, we're pretty strict about it.
So you kind of force it to a point where you have
Yeah, what am I supposed to do? I have to learn it that way because otherwise, whatever the otherwise is. So I don't know that I'm right. I'm just hoping that there's a push here in the Rishonim to say there's a reason why we're willing to allow for the split. Now let's look at a question on the sheet of Rebbe Lazar. This is going to be, I guess really the rest is just difficult Gemara. So let's learn it together. Meisiv Rabba. Rabba asks the following question from a brisa. Ve'elu she'ein mifaglen ve'ein mispalgen. This alone is already like against the sheet of Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar said A can be mefagel B, but B can not necessarily be mefagel A. But over here we said, no, something that's not mefagel is also not mispagel. It can't make something puzzle and it can't become puzzle and we can't make something puzzle. Semer sheberoshe kvashim, the tsemer kvasim, the wool on the head of a keves, on an animal. V'seir shebezakan tiashim, and the hairs that are part of the beard of a goat. V'ha'or, the skin. V'harotev, the juices of the animal. V'hakipa, the animal parts that fall to the bottom in the cooking process. V'ha'alal, the neck cartilage that's not edible. V'ha'mora'ah, which is the crop, again, part of the digestive tract of the animal. V'ha'atzamos, referring to the bones. V'ha'gidin, sinews. V'ha'karnayim, talking about the horns. V'ha'tlafim, the hooves. V'ha'shlil, referring to a fetus of a female that was shechted while pregnant. V'ha'shilya, the placenta. V'chalav hamukdashin, the milk of female animals. Ubeitze torin, or the eggs of a bird. Kulan. In all of these cases, lo mefaglen v'lo mispalgen. There is no A is to B or not B is to A. So this looks like a brisa that goes against Rabbi Elazar. Let's just be clear. Rabbi Elazar is an Amora. It's not a Tana. Our Gemara doesn't open with Tana. Our Gemara opens that Rabbi Elazar was of the opinion. Rabbi Elazar is an Amora. And the brisa continues, Ve'en chayavin alein, if you were to eat it, mishum pigul no sar v'tameh. Even had you eaten these things when the items were in fact pigul no sar and tameh, you wouldn't be chayav for eating a hoof of something that's pigul no sar and tameh, because it's not food. We actually have this principle in halacha called lav shmei achila. So that's why, for example, when one swallows a pill, even if the pill has treif in it, that's not achila. You're not chewing the food. That's not achila. You're consuming, but it's not achila in the typical way. So this does come up in halacha in many ways. One of the shilas that recently I heard, not so recently, I heard this about maybe 10 years ago, is children or adults who are fed through tubes that doesn't go through Beis HaGoren, can they have treif put into their stomach, right? So l'maisa, whatever. I don't think anybody puts pork, they can't taste it. There's no hana. You'd have to be a lahachis, should be lahachis to do. There's no benefit to you to do that. And also, it's metamte mesalef and the sifrei ashkafa. But anyways, that's a good shaila. But that's not through Beis HaGoren. You're not tasting anything. Anyways, there's no hanas going. So let's continue in the brisa. V'hamale mehen bachutz pater. And of everything in this list, if you were to take a korban that really should have been shechted or burned, I should say, in the mikdash, and you took it out of the mikdash, now it's chutei chutz, says the Gemara. Yeah, but the body part you took is a quack body part. Ooh, what are you going to do with a hoof? What are you going to do with the crop? What are you going to do with the horns? So even if you did chutei chutz with them and you burned it somewhere else where you shouldn't, halacha is your pater. Now, what is the implication from here? We're a third of the way down. My love, isn't it the case, lo mefaglen hazevach, v'lo mispaglen machmas zevach, that we break the rule of Rebbe Lazar? It's not A causes B, but B doesn't cause A. No, it's just flat, zero, nothing. Says the Gemara, lo, that's not true. Lo mefaglen es hazevach, v'lo mispaglen machmas atzman. Maybe it just means that each in their own way. The whole zevach doesn't become problematic. V'lo mispaglen machmas atzman is that if I had kavana for the hoof, it doesn't make the hoof into it, but maybe this brisa is not talking about A impacting B. It's only talking about A impacting itself and B impacting itself, and therefore no raya. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Ihachi, if that's true, then I don't understand the repetitious language of the brisa, because there is in fact a doubling of the language in the brisa that we learned above. What does it say? Hadikatani seifa. It says, Kulan lo mefaglen velo mispaglen. Hasulamali. The fact that you're doubling down on the language, it therefore seems to be that there's really no impact between one and another, because otherwise, why did you say that extra language? I understand your first approach. You want to say A is only talking about A and B is only talking about B, and therefore we had a kasha in Rebbe Lazar. But when the Gemara now doubles down on its language and it has a duplicative language, that would indicate to me that you're teaching me something else. What would that be? Must be that yes, A can make B into pigul, but B cannot make A, and that we don't even allow that, and therefore Rebbe Lazar is wrong. Hasulamali. Why did I repeat that? The Gemara says, according to your logic that something repetitive is to teach me something unique. Well, there's another piece of the brisa that we just learned that's also duplicative. Ein chayavin alav mishum pigul hasulamali. That line was also doubled. I know it's a little abstract, but if you look back up in the brisa, that line was also doubled. We're right now on the first of the long lines. The brisa we're discussing is about a third of the way down. Ella, that extra line of Ein Chayavin Alav Mishum Pigul, Aidi de Boile Misna Nosar Vitame Tana Pigul. You're right. We didn't need to talk about Pigul again. We already discussed it, but we had to add in Nosar and Tame, so we stopped in Pigul again. Hachanami, in our case, you are concerned about the fact that it doubled the language and said, Kulan lo mefaglin velo mispaglin. Hachanami, Aidi de Boile Misna Hamalen mehen bachutz. Tananami v'chulan lo mefaglin v'lo mispalgin. Because we had to teach another halacha that if you take one of these odd body parts and you bring that meat outside of the mikdash, and where you should not do that, you're bringing a korban to a place where you should not. So therefore, tananami v'chulan lo mefaglin v'lo mispalgin. There too, we're just repeating halacha in a slightly different context, but no raya from there. So you tried to ask on Rabbi Elazar, you were unsuccessful. 3 lines into the wide lines, the Gemara says, Rava Amar. Afanon nami tanina. The Gemara on the side here, interestingly, the Shita Mekubetzes changes the language here to Amar Rava. We are well trained from day school that when you see Rava Amar, it sounds like he's arguing. The context here really may not warrant that, and therefore the Shita Mekubetzes switches it around. So Amar Rava Afanon nami tanina. We actually have a shita that seems to support the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. What is that? Hashochet hamukdashin. We just learned this, that if one were to shecht a female animal with kavana to eat the shlil o shilya, lechol shlil o shilya bachutz, we said lo pigel. And I had explained in our Mishnah based on the Rishonim that that's because these are not really regular body parts, right? These are temporary body parts. We also said in that Mishnah, still quoting, that as well, if one does malika on a bird with the kavana to eat its eggs, bachutz, also lo pigel. But then we had a repeat statement in the brisa about, not a repeat, but we had a statement in the brisa that has a diuk that's dangerous. The hadar tani, later in our Mishnah, what did we learn? Chalav hamukdashinu beitze torin ein chayavan alei mishum pigal no sarvatame. Pigul no sarvatame. That if it comes to the milk of a mukdashin, a female animal, and the eggs of a bird, what did we say about those if in fact they were made into pigul? That if you ate the milk or the eggs, that you're not chayav on pigul no sar and tame. What is the diuk from there? The diuk is against what we learned earlier in our Mishnah. Hashlil v'shilya chayavin. In the end of the Mishnah, it only spoke about the chalav mukdashin and beitzei torim, but it left out shlil and shilya. So therefore, the Reisha of the Mishnah says that shlil and shilya you'll be pater from, there's no pigul. But in the end of the Mishnah, when it talked about chalav hamukdashin and beitzei torim, it left out shlil v'shilya, which implies that you're chayav on pigul for that. So we have a built-in stira into the Mishnah. The Mishnah is explicitly saying by shlil and shilya that there's no pigul, but then at the end it implies that there is going to be a chiyuv of pigul. Elolav shmamina kan machmas zevach kan machmas atzman shmamina. Oh no, each of them are talking about their own thing. The case of chalav hamukdashim was not meant to make a diuk from. The first case was talking about regular making something into pigul. But the end of the Mishnah was talking about something different. It wasn't talking about making something into pigul. It was talking about a different din. If the animal was already pigul on its own and you ate the egg, you ate the totally different conversation, and therefore you cannot apply the cases. And that actually functions as a raya for Rebbe Lazar, Shmamina. And that brings us to the 2 dots about 3/4 of the way down on Lamed Hey Amud Beis.
Rabbi Elazar is holding that whole Mishnah. It seems like he's holding that the shlil is not part of the zevach. I'm sorry, he's holding that the shlil is part of the zevach, unlike the Mishnah.
No, Rabbi Lazar said not that way. Rabbi Lazar, it's part of the zevach that if you make the zevach into a korban,
It's not a separate thing, right? If you make the zevach a korban,
in that direction, A to B.
Yeah.
If from zevach to shlil, you can make the shlil into pigul. That's true. But if you have kavana to make the shlil into a chutz lizmano, into pigul, it does not impact the rest of the animal. It's unidirectional. It's only one. That's what he writes. That's explicit in Rebbe Lazar's statement, 4 lines from the bottom, 5 lines, 6 lines from the bottom. He says, oh, it's the beginning of the Gemara. Pigel bezevach nispagel ashlil. That if he has kavana by the zevach to make it into a pigel, and he's successful, then the shlil, which really is not a full body part, just a temporary one, but the fetus does become pigul. But the reverse is not true. The shlil, when he has kavana to make the shlil into pigul, it only affects the shlil, but lo nispal geal hazebach. A affects B, but B doesn't affect A. So at the 2 dots here, the Gemara quotes Tanan Hassam. We have a Mishnah. This Mishnah can be found later in this Masechta on Daf Pei Daled. And the Gemara here is talking about a halacha of whether or not something that was put up on the Mizbeach, if it's ever taken down. It's a shtickle chutzpah to take things off the Mizbeach once they're put up. This is a discussion that we've come across a number of times already. And here we're going to see it in our context. So it's non hasam. The Mishnah writes, "Uva'ale mumin." If a bal mum, if an animal that had a mum was put up on the mizbeach, do we take it down or do we not take it down? So says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva machshir b'ba'ale mumin. No problem at all. If you put a bal mum on the mizbeach, Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that we do not take it down off the mizbeach. Afal pi that it's a bal mum. Look at this qualification from Rav Yochanan. Amar Rav Chia bar Abba, Amar Rav Yochanan. Lo hichshe Rabbi Akiva, ela bedukin sheba'ayin. The only types of psulin, of mumin, that he allowed the animal to stay up on the mizbeach were small types of things like bedukin sheba'ayin, which was a small eye injury. And why was he mekil? Hoel uksherin be'ofos. That's really interesting, even though they're different sug of animal. Not only are they different animals, but cow and chicken, you're not even sheep and chicken, you're cow and chicken, you're like 2 steps away. But Rabbi Yochanan puts in a little clarification. The only types of mumin that Rabbi Akiva allows for the animal that has this particular mum to stay on the mizbeach, the only kinds of animal like that are animals that have small types of mumin, ones that are kosher ba'ofos. Again, obviously by ofos, we're more makel in regards to mumin than we are by big animals. But this is only true shekadam hekdeshan es muman. That's only true if it first became hekdesh and then the mum took place. What's implied from here, of course, is that if the mum came first and then you were makdish it, you would take it off the mizbeach. You just did a bad job of picking a korban. The animal should never have been mukdash in the first place because it had a mum. Even Beduk and Sheba'ayin, even the small ones. So this is just a little bit of a nuance within Rabbi Yochanan's taich on Rabbi Akiva. Skip the parentheses and we'll be stopping at the Mishnah in just a couple of minutes. Umode Rabbi Akiva ba'olas nekeva. Now in general, this is good Yedias Klalius for Zevachim. An ola is usually a male. It's usually not a nekeva. So what happens if someone takes a nekeva and they're makdish it as an ola, which is wrong, but the mechanics work, right? It's hektish now. And you put it up on the mizbeach. So look at what the Gemara says. That Rabbi Akiva agrees to the following: "To command the kadam muma lehekdesha dami." It's as though the mum existed before it was mukdash. What is the mum of a nekeva? It's a nekeva for an ola, which is just the oil and water. Those 2 things don't work.
It didn't exist at the time of the hack. It was makdish.
Correct. Right. So the mechanics of being makdish, it worked, but it's still not eligible for ola. Lamaisa, they did the shchita, they took the female ola, they did the shchita, they put it on the mizbeach, and someone looks at the animal and says, "Huh, that's a female ola."
It's not the fact that it had a mum before it was makdish, it's the fact that it had a mum before the shechita started, before the process started, no?
So there's 2 categories. If the animal was mukdash first, and then let's talk about a male ola. Animal is first mukdash, and then it has a small bird type of small thing that bird would be kosher with, like beduk and sheba'ayin. So then the halacha is im ala lo tered. If you put it up on the mizbech, no problem. However, if you are makdish an animal that already had that little eye injury, you cannot put that on the mizbech, and if you do, you take it down. But if the animal is female, we treat it as though it had a mum before it was mukdash. Its mum is its gender. It's not like a psul.
This flag.
Yeah, it's not a psul, it's not Padukin Shabayin. It could be physically a perfect animal as it relates to Mumin, but it's completely puzzle for an Ola. So how do we look at that animal that has no mum? So Rabbi Akiva says he's moda. He agrees that that even though there's no mum on the nekeva, but we treat that animal, which has been put on the mizbeach erroneously, we treat it as an animal, like a male animal, the equivalent to the male animal that had the mum before the hektish. And both of those cases is tered. You take it down. That's a big deal to take something off of the mizbeach. Really, it's a chutzpah. It's like you gave a gift and took it back. In the hashkafa, it's just not nice. Not the way to do things. So that's what he says. So says the Gemara, Masiv Reb Zera, Hama'ala mehen bachutz pater. Reb Zera asks, and he says the following: we had learned earlier in our Mishnah that hama'ala mehen, that someone who takes something from the list listed. Let's talk about the shlil. Let's say somebody takes the fetus and they take it and they bring it bachutz. The halacha says that it's pater. The halacha is that if you take the shlil, because it's really not actually part of the animal, it only has a temporary connection. But if you take the shlil, which is again one of the non-connected parts of the animal, and you bring it outside of the makam hamikdash, pater. What does that imply? Iman, had it been that it was from a mother, if that animal was brought outside and burnt, the mother itself, the regular meat of the mother, so chayev. But vehechi mishkachas la, what would that case be where an animal is brought out and burnt? Says the Gemara. The only case I can think of is ba'olas nekeva. That's the case where it's tered, where you pull it off of the mizbeach and bring it down. Now, here we go. Iamris bishlama kasava Rabbi Akiva olas nekeva im alsa lo tered hamani Rabbi Akiva. If you want to say bishlama kasava Rabbi Akiva that he holds olas nekeva, no.
Who in the world would be the Tana of such a Mishnah? It must be Rabbi Akiva if you want to say that Rabbi Akiva holds.
No, he holds.
No, Rabbi Akiva holds the opposite. Right after the parentheses. Umoda Rabbi Akiva ba'olas nekeva, the command kadam muma lehektesha dami. And you're tered. Rashi says, "V'hechi mishkachas la ba'olas nekeva." It has to be talking only about an olas nekeva. The ilu b'shlamim, hamal lebesara mi besaran b'chutz pater, the lav miskabel b'fnimhu. That's fine. Hamani Rabbi Akiva, the keban de b'fnimim also lo tered. V'chayev ala b'chutz. What am I missing?
Leave it backwards. Is it Rabbi Akiva holds that as long as the mum happened after, the hepdisha,
That's Rabbi Yochanan.
then it's low tered. And then the end of it was the motor of kiva, bolos nekeva, like that. Command the kadam muma like dishdan, which means that it's low tered.
No. Mum, if the mum, that's what Rabbi Yochanan just said.
But that's what Rabbi Akiva was moted to after the parenthesis.
Yeah, but he was
moted that it's synonymous with, and olas nekeva is synonymous with
a male that the mum came before the hektish, which is tered. Rashi, 8 lines from the bottom. Umod Rabbi Akiva ba'olas behema nekeva shetered. V'alf b'shek sher ba'ovos lechatchila. My timer, the command kadam muma lehektesha. She'en lecha mum be'ola gadol mizeh the kol ola zacharhu. No, we definitely learned that part, right? So what am I missing? So this, let's go back to the Masiv Reb Zera. Reb Zera said, Hamala mehen bachutz pater, that if, let's say, a shlil was brought outside, it would be pater, hameiman chayev, but if it would have come from the mother, it would have been chayev. Ve'echi mishkachas la ba'olas nekeva. Must be talking about it in olas nekeva, because had it been a shlamim, it would never have been chayev. Now, Iyam Rishbishlam Aksav Rabbi Akiva Olas Nekeva Im also lo tered. Hamani Rabbi Akiva he. Let's just keep reading for a second. Eli Amrisim also Tered. This sounds like I'm missing something. I'm missing something here. I Amris Bishlam Kasavar Rabbi Akiva. Olas Nekeva im also lo Tered. If you want to say that Rabbi Zera holds, that Rabbi Akiva holds that way, then fine. I'm sorry, I don't have this clear. Let's try.
Saying that Kiva obviously has to hold the opposite because it doesn't exactly your concern. It doesn't make any sense.
Right, that was the last way I just read it, is that maybe if there's anyone who would have said that Rabbi Akiva holds that him also lo tered, fine.
Like
Then it would have been Rabbi Akiva. But if you say Ela Amris him also tered,
He's arguing on Rabbi Yochanan, he's basically arguing on Rabbi Yochanan's
understanding of Rabbi
of
Akiva.
Rabbi Akiva being loaded.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
yeah, you're 100% correct.
Look, he's only Rabbi Akiva the other way.
Not like Rabbi Yochanan. Beautiful. I think that's correct. So let's put that all together.
Not likely to be asking him to keep.
No, yeah. So let's take that understanding that Reb Zera is questioning Rav Yochanan's understanding. Rav Yochanan wanted to say that the only time that Rabbi Akiva, we said Rabbi Akiva was machshir and bali mumin, right? So Rabbi Yochanan limited that rule to say only with something that's ksher and ba'ofos, like b'duka and shaba'ayin. Reb Zera's like, no, that's not true. The only way that it would work is if you say Rabbi Akiva holds, because our Mishnah only works according to a different way to understand Rabbi Akiva.
This has to be also.
Yeah, it has to be olas. And because it has to be olas nekeva, so therefore, I Amris, not like Rav Yochanan, that Bishlam Aksav Rabbi Akiva olas nekeva also lo tered hamani Rabbi Akiva against Rav Yochanan. Ela I Amris im also tered hamani. If you want to say that you take it down, there are no shitas like that. Ema hamala mehen bachutz pater. Hame emure iman chayev. So that's what the Gemara is saying here, hamani, that it wouldn't work out with anyone. Ela I Amrisim also tered hamani. There's no one to learn it that way. So says the Gemara, Ema, what we should say is hamala mehen bachutz pater. That if the shlil was taken out, it would be pater. Ha me emure iman chayev. We have to change the way we understand the Mishnah because there would be no author that would have held tered. So instead of saying we're talking about the mother, says the Gemara, we're talking about emure iman. Says the Gemara, we can't be talking about the emure. Ha mehen ktani, which sounds like the animal itself. The iman dum yadidhu. That's the animal itself. Says the Gemara, ela ima hama'ale me'emurehen bachutz pater. Hama'ale me'emurehen of the shlil. That's what it means, because this is a quote from the Mishnah. Hama'ale bachutz pater. It's adding a word. Hama'ale me'emurehen bachutz, talking about the emurim of the shlil that would be pater. Ha me'emure iman taka would have been chai. Right. Sorry for my lack of clarity, but thank you for your help. Glad we figured that piece out. That we're basically rejecting Rav Yochanan's understanding of the Gemara. That was Rav Zera's question. Okay, we'll pause right here and pick up with the next Mishnah Mir Hashem tomorrow night. Wishing you all a beautiful night.